Welcome to the Spooky Scary Show. We are two friends in two different states who discuss all things spooky, scary, and just downright strange. We read new stories every week. If you would like to suggest a topic or submit a paranormal story, email us at spookyscaryshow@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram and Facebook for spooky facts and updates.
Dang, Pinky, you sound so nice in our new intro. You could be like one of those ASMR people.
I don't know what that is. What's ASMR?
Oh my gosh, those YouTube videos where the people are like, they take their nails and they tap the microphone or they like whisper into the microphone because it's supposed to give you like chills. It's really gross. I hate it.
I've never heard of that.
But I mean it in a sense that your voice is very nice, and for those who are just tuning in for the first time, that is the first time we've ever played that intro. So I am super proud because we are making moves.
Yeah, hell yeah. Well, it's been it's been a lot of fun making all this stuff. I enjoy it a lot.
Definitely.
So we're on Podbean now and Spotify and soon to be iTunes, which I'm super excited to announce.
Yes. I feel like, I don't know, I mean, we're such a little podcast, but we're definitely trying to make some big waves, and anything is such a huge milestone moment to really kind of celebrate and everything, because we've gone so far, and I like to thank everybody who's been so kind, and who's, interacted with us on, like, YouTube, and on our Instagram, and everything. You are our ghosties, and we love you so much.
Right. I freak out every time we get a comment. It's just so exciting.
Same. I'm like, we're famous. Bum, 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 bum.
YouTube famous.
Oh, I love it. So, we are recording on Saturday, but yesterday was Friday the 13th. Spooky.
Yeah. This week was pretty cool. We had the harvest moon, which is the full moon closest to the beginning of the fall or autumn equinox. And the last time a full moon occurred on Friday the 13th was on October 13th in 2000. So it's been a while.
Oh,
I don't think
wow.
we're going to have another one until like 2049 or something like that.
That's crazy. And you know what's sad? In Arizona, where I was, you couldn't even see the moon last night. It was very disappointing because there was like clouds covering it, but you could tell the moon tried to look all like big, behind all the clouds.
That's funny. I could see it. Last night was a micro moon too, I think. So it wasn't as big as they usually are.
So on our Instagram, I shared some fun facts about the number 13. And what I learned about the number 13 is that it originated in the Middle Ages from the story of Jesus and the Last Supper and crucifixion, which there were 13 individuals presented in the upper room of the 13th of that Thursday, the night before the death of Jesus Christ on Good Friday. But I think you have a 13th, or like a 13 tattoo, don't you, Pinky?
I do. Yeah, I got it in 2015, which was a year that we had 3 Friday the 13th. So that was pretty cool. People always think of it as like super negative, the number 13. In the major arcana of the tarot, the 13th card is called the Death or the Reaper, depending on what deck you use, and it's negative, misunderstood as negative, I would say. So the correct way to read the Death card in tarot is as a process of transformation and rebirth. It signifies upheaval and even destruction. And for me, 4 years ago, I underwent a huge upheaval for my life as I knew it. I was done with college and in a new relationship, which is the best I've had in my life. And I had to distance myself from my parents, and my friends all moved away. Looking at you, Dolly.
I'm so sorry.
It was just a very significant time for me, and my tattoo represents all of that. Like the need to rebel, but also the need to change.
Definitely. And as much as change is scary, it's also very good, a lot of good things can come from change as well. And as we kind of grow from being teenagers and we kind of become like young adults, it's crazy to think of like me in Arizona. I would never think that you would be like living in Washington right now, but Washington is the best thing that has ever happened to you because of like job-wise and just it just being so beautiful out there, and I'm so jealous because I want to move out there and everything. And my old Instagram handle used to be Lucky Dolly 13 because for me, the number 13 has never been unlucky. I've never felt anything evil or negative towards it.
Right. I feel the same way.
Yeah. Maybe we're possessed.
I'm fueled. I'm fueled by the weird and the witchy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not superstitious. I've always been aware of Friday the 13th, and I think it's always just been a good day because of it.
Definitely.
Did you know that they, leave it out of public buildings, and hotels don't have 13th floors, and restaurants don't have 13s in their prices? It's serious.
Oh my god, now that you mention that, yeah. I don't think I've ever, looked at a menu, and they're like, oh yeah, a burger's $13.
I mean, maybe just because that's a weird price, and I don't know, we seem to gravitate towards even numbers being better.
Nope, it's a conspiracy. It's always a conspiracy. Alrighty, well, as usual with our little podcast, we like to get a little drunky pants, so as usual, I've been drinking my gin, and what have you been drinking over there, Pinky?
Same old light beer, as always. I did have gin last night, though.
Oh, you did?
I made a fancy gin. Yeah. So I like to use this, it's kind of like LaCroix. It's a seltzer water, but I get this cranberry lime stuff. It's pretty good. And I put grenadine and Sprite.
Oh, you and your
to kill
grenadine.
The rubbing alcohol flavor. You gotta have sugar to kill the rubbing alcohol flavor.
I know. I, pop the cork on my Kirkland brand of gin, and I smelled it, and I was like, oh my gosh, because it's made with mint, this one. And I was like, oh, it smells so good. Oof. And then I told my boyfriend to smell it. I was like, Charlie, smell it. And he's like, ugh, because he doesn't drink. He's like, that smells like straight rubbing alcohol. And I was like, no, it doesn't.
Mouthwash. That's funny.
It's so good. Alrighty, so what is today's theme, Pinky?
Today's theme is a little heavy. We're talking about insane asylums, and I will be reading a story called The Man in Black. As a disclaimer, we do not agree with the actions and the practices that were performed in these insane asylums. Some of this content might be triggering. It is extremely important to seek the right sort of help for any sort of illness.
I couldn't agree more with that. Personally, I do have a lot of mental illness that runs in my family and who affects those who I love dearly around me. The things in my segment I'm going to go over, it is extremely messed up and we do not agree, like Pinky said, with any of these claims. But in light of the Spooky Scary Show, we did want to cover this topic. So, just forewarning you, let's get into it. Okay, so let's get into it. So in mine, I have background in psych. So what qualifies a person to go into a insane asylum? And Pinky, if you look into the drive, there should be a file with, my PDF on there, and there should be a picture from it is called Reasons for Admission 1864 to 1889.
I see it.
You can be admitted to a, air quote, insane asylum for the following reasons. You can be admitted by a family member or by court, and by that I mean you can be elderly or if you have Alzheimer's. If your husband wanted to drop you off instead of getting a divorce, this has been common. So if you do have, special needs and your family feels like they are not equipped to take care of you. If you are a prostitute or you have been convicted of prostitution, or if you masturbate. So if you are a...
Jesus Christ.
Yes, so if you're a teenager exploring your body, and your parents do not agree with that, you can be committed for being a chronic masturbator.
If you are a woman and you are upset or have any kind of illness, you'll be diagnosed with hysteria and doctors will masturbate you.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. The reasons for admission picture, it's infuriating because there's literally hysteria, jealousy, and religion. So if you're over religious, you could be committed.
Novel reading,
medicine to prevent contraception. So medicine to be on birth control. Parents were cousins. Tobacco and masturbation. Masturbation comes up on this list a lot. Political excitement. Politics. Religious enthusiasm, but that's came up twice now.
Female disease? What is that?
I have it on my notes too. I don't exactly know what they mean by female disease, but I do know if you have your period and I didn't know how to handle your PMS, or if you had postpartum, what was that book called? Lady in the Yellow Wallpaper or something like that?
Oh, yeah. Who is that? Who does that?
So The Yellow Wallpaper was by Charlotte Perkins Gilliam in 1892. So this came out right in the middle of the whole insane asylum thing, which is extremely unfortunate because what they would do is they would admit a lot of women to these insane asylums and they would make them sit on this bench from 6 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night without anything to read, without anything to do, no stimuli, and just sit there every single day. And there's a famous quote, and she said that would drive any woman to madness.
Gotta give it up for all these historical women for not murdering every single man.
Yeah. Seriously.
I read a thing today, and it said that when trains were first invented, they didn't think women would be able to ride them because they didn't think that their bodies would be capable of going faster than 50 miles an hour without their uteruses leaving their bodies, or something to that effect.
Why? Why is that a thing? Do you fear that your testes are just gonna fly out the flippin' window?
If anybody's reproductive organs are gonna fly or flap, it's the testicles.
Yes!
Come on. Ours are internal. We're protected.
Yes, B. That's right. We got ours tucked up inside. We are stronger than men anyways. No offense to the men out there listening. I'm just saying. Okay, so the Rolling Hills Asylum, there was a mix of orphans and widows living next to those who were mentally handicapped and also inmates. You can be admitted to some asylums for trivial things such as falling from a horse or laziness. You can be admitted for things as imaginary female troubles, air quotes. Or if you are a murderer or if you are suffering from PTSD. Postpartum depression, like I mentioned before, was not well understood, so many females were admitted for this reason alone. You can be admitted for jealousy, for fighting a fire, suppressed masturbation, that's where the masturbation came back again, the war, time of life, so if you're having a midlife crisis, superstitious, shooting of a daughter is on this list, smallpox, spinal irritation, greediness, grief, gunshot wound, hard study, rumor of husband murder, Salvation Army, self-abuse, sexual abuse. Yeah, so anyways, That is infuriating, and I'm going to move on from that list and go on to much worse topics.
I just want to say how happy, as many problems as we have nowadays and things that are wrong, I really am appreciative to be born in the time that I have been born and not have to deal with any of this bullshit.
I do agree. I mean, modern science has came so far, and to think about it, like, not that far was this away, in a sense. I mean, it's just crazy that women in general were so misunderstood, and just expressing who you are. I mean, it's just masturbation, like, in general. Like, in today's society, we encourage that to discourage, sexual activity with others in some cases.
As many problems as we have, we just have so many things that are good to be appreciative of right now.
Exactly. Personally, I'm not a feminist or whatever with those movements. If you are, kudos to you. Keep doing what you're doing. But I just feel, as a whole, maybe as a society, we are finally waking up, and we are a little bit more sensitive, because people are like, oh, these millennials, they are just so sensitive, and they're just not like how the past generations used to be. And maybe it's like that because we are awakening as a society, and we are more conscious of what we are doing to each other, to the environment, and everything as a whole. So it's just kind of crazy to see how much we have came from.
Yeah, right. I'm sorry, Karen. Your generation wasn't allowed to vote, but we're the insensitive ones.
That's right. Get out of here, Karen. You're not going to
talk
to...
speak to the manager. Haircut.
You're not going to talk to my manager. Oh, my God. Alrighty. So, common practices in insane asylums. So, brace yourself. I hate this so much. Overpopulation. For example, the witch's castle on the hill was only meant to house 600 patients, which it quickly grew to holding 2,000 patients. This led to people being uncared for. In some cases, a person was reported chained to a bed where their skin grew over their shackles. I'm going to repeat that. Their skin literally grew over their shackles as they were, shackled to their bed.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. People walking around in their own excrements. Most places, the patients were left in complete isolation for days. And that would also mean no power. So if you were lucky enough to have, the sunlight come in, that's all you got. I hate this part so much. Regular beatings, electrode shock therapy, lobotomies, restraint, and cold water treatments. And by cold water treatments, I mean ice baths, where they would just dump you in a tub full of water and ice. That were
for people who masturbated.
Literally,
and
yeah,
people
anything.
Who had feminine cramps or postpartum depression.
Or you're just too rowdy and they didn't know how to deal with you, so they just felt like excessive force was the only way to get you to calm down and be compliant. I know. As I go through this, it only breaks my heart when I get to my last segment of the recorded ghost reportings, because for me, I personally believe ghosts or whatever are just souls that are trapped, and they need our help to release them and to make them free. They are completely different from demons and everything, but I don't know, it just breaks my heart to think, like, can you imagine if you were trapped in the same nightmare every single day for eternity, but you're not quite in hell, you're just in purgatory? So it breaks my heart. I wish I could save them. Many patients were forced to survive with no clothes, insufficient food, and sewage-filled rooms and hallways. Some places you were forced, like I said before, forced to sit up straight on a bench for 14 hours a day and not move or talk with no reading material every single day. So if you were a sane person, that would literally drive you in flip insane. And so now I'm getting into the ghostly experiences. So the most common experiences include hearing footsteps running along the halls, shadow people walking or crawling, and as much as the walking and crawling kind of sounds creepy, especially the crawling, it's, if you're in a room filled with, people who might not be all the way there and they're not supervised, they might crawl around because that just might be like what they're thinking of at the time. So I feel like that shouldn't be really creepy. People have reported seeing wheelchairs move on their own, witnessing ghost-like faces appear in the windows, feeling a presence following you, possibly the most terrifying of them all, hearing eerie voices shout, "Get out, go away, I will kill you, and why won't you leave?" So again, saying that is thinking about everything that these people went through. I mean, obviously, as a spirit, they are terrified and they are trapped. So they don't understand why people are going there now. So they're going to say, "Leave me alone, go away, I'm going to protect myself."
Yeah, all the muffed up stuff that's happened to me so far.
Yeah.
I don't blame you, the ghosties.
Yeah, why won't you leave me alone? Haven't I suffered enough? It breaks my heart. There have been reports of spectators being scratched and being pushed by unknown entities. There's been reports of items hurling across the room towards visitors. At the old Dolly hospital, there has been reports of a child's voice uttering the words, "Daddy, shot, sorry." This is creepy enough on its own, but it gets even more alarming when you find out that the Utah Ghost Organization claims that these words came from a ghost of a child who was allegedly shot by its father. The manager at Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum states she once saw 40 doors suddenly slam shut simultaneously, whilst other visitors have witnessed a ghost boy stood in the corner of the room, as well as sightings, whispering, and forgotten patients have also been reported on the top of unusual smells, the sound of squeaking gurneys, and the screams coming from the electroshock room. Several reputable ghost hunter groups have visited Penhurst Asylum, where they documented spooky audio recordings, suddenly changes in temperature, and the unexplained movement of objects throughout the grounds. Spine-chilling recordings of voices exclaiming, "Go away, I'll kill you, and why won't you leave?" seem tame compared to other reports, which include various objects being hurled across the room, visitors being physically pushed, and multiple EVPs. The Rolling Hills Asylum, there was a mix of orphans and widows living next to those who were mentally handicapped and inmates. There was even a resident who suffered from gigantism. He was just overly tall, who is said to still be there today. People have reported seeing a 7-foot shadow person looming in what was his room back in the day.
Wow.
So, yeah, that is my background in psych, which is really actually kind of sad, because they're still scared.
I know, it's supposed to be spooky scary, but really this stuff is pretty sad.
I know! Ugh.
thinking of it as, like, from a more informed point of view, you know?
Yeah. It's hard to, like, separate yourself from being like, okay, I'm a commentator, this is actually what happened, and then from being kind of like, well, I would never want any of my family members to, or my friends to experience anything that these people were put through. It's insane that we thought that that was okay. Like, who in their right mind? I don't know.
Even today, people in mental asylums still don't get the greatest treatment in the world.
Even with the legal system, I know for experience, they don't know how to handle those who are, not all there. They're just kind of like, do whatever, just to quiet you down so you can do your time and get out. But there's no therapy, rehabilitation, or anything of that.
Yeah, I have a lot of feels for those kind of people, too. And a lot of people who need, like, mental rehabilitation and help that shouldn't be in a prison setting are in a prison setting just because, like what you said, we don't know what to do with those people.
I agree. So, what do you got today for me about the man in black, I believe?
Yes, so my story is called The Man in Black. It's a fictional story by Nate Kenyon. I think you're going to like it. It's pretty spooky scary. I want to know more about this obsession, Dr. Devi said. Tell me about the man in black. Andy looked around the perfectly square room. The walls had been painted a soothing shade of green, presumably to cool the heated minds of the psychotics. A ceiling fan tickled lazily overhead. He tried to cross his legs and found the restraints wouldn't allow it. I am not a violent man, for Christ's sakes, he said. Ask Annie, she'll tell you. Can't you loosen these a little? Dr. Devi blinked at him. Devi was a small man, with an overly large head, bald, except for the barest wisp of hair around his ears. He looked like a chicken. Andy thought to himself, with his hooked nose and beady eyes. We'll leave them for now, Devi said. I want to avoid those outbursts of yours. Andy sighed. The man in black had taken over his life like some kind of fast-spreading cancer. What he had been forced to do in that alley made him sick. He'd been seduced, used and discarded like so much garbage. But nobody wanted to hear the truth. Devi had his own agenda and his own rules, and he was in charge here. I don't expect you to believe me, Andy said. It sounds crazy. He shook his head. Possession? I can hardly believe it myself. Just start at the beginning, Devi said, and so Andy did. The man in black first appeared to him in a dream. At least, he thought it was a dream then. This was about a week after Annie left. Andy tended to drift when asleep, like a boat in the strong wind. A distant memory of his father, come to life again in a stiff white shirt and bow tie. His father began to speak, and dissolved into a car that ran without wheels, on tracks through the night sky. And the car turned into Annie's pixie face, and then that dissolved into the hallway of his old high school in White Falls, where the doors to the classrooms were all shut tight and locked from the inside, and he was alone among his own echoing footsteps. Andy tossed and turned, twisting the starched sheets around his body in his sleep. And on the mattress next to him, the dog lifted his head and whined into the darkness. At the sound of the dog, he drifted towards consciousness. That was when the man in black appeared at the foot of his bed. He wore a tuxedo suit with a black bow tie and a black shirt underneath. A black cummerbund was tied to his waist, and a black flower decorated his lapel. His eyes glowed like two red coals in the ashes of his face. "Who the fuck are you?" Andy said hoarsely. He sat up and clutched his sheets to his chest. "Don't act so frightened," the man said. "I think you know who I am."
Eek.
"Yes, indeed." "Get out of my room!" "Why are you trembling?" Why do you try to pull away after the effort you extended to bring me here? Such a shame that you don't have the guts to face me after all you've suffered through. I expected more from you, Andrew, really. But perhaps I was fooling myself. I've watched you live your pathetic little life for far too long, and I'm tired of it.
Oh my God. I don't like him. Go away.
It gets worse.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm ready.
The man waved a hand through the air like a hypnotist, counting down from 10. Goodbye for now. Sleep. You'll see me again soon enough.
Ugh.
Then... The next morning, Andy tried to dismiss what he'd seen as nothing more than a bad dream. The dog hadn't moved from the bed. After all, if someone had actually entered his room, surely the dog would have chased him off. Okay, if I could just pause right now and say that of all of the potential paranormal experiences that I've ever had, that I have written off on just the cat or just the dog or something that I can explain to myself because that can't be real. Nope. It's the cat.
100% the cat. Dogs are innocent. But I mean, like, if your dog is talking to you, I don't know, fam.
Right. He got up at 6 and went downtown as usual, where he worked as a clerk at a small law firm. He spent most of his time at the office writing letters, filing papers, which required nothing more than a stamp from municipal court, and buying lunch for the lawyers. He worked on a summer clerk's salary that allowed him to pay his rent and buy food, and left nothing else. He had little use for money. Annie had paid for most of the things that they did, and now that she was gone, he did not feel the need to go out. He went to his desk, located in a cubbyhole outside Mr. Welk's office. There was mail to open, form letters to be copied and sent out, filing to be done, but lately it all seemed so unimportant. The lawyers moved around him as if he were invisible. Mr. Welk came looking for the correspondence file for the Edwards case. Welk was a heavy man who combed his hair up over his head to hide a bald spot. "This is important, Andrew. We go to trial in 2 days." "I haven't seen the file, Mr. Welk. I've got a lunch appointment. Could you hunt for it in my office?" Welk's office was a mess. File boxes stacked on top of one another leaned in one corner by the window. Case books and supplements littered the floor. Andy went through it all patiently. He moved to the big desk and sorted through a jumble of pens, pencils, scratch pads, batteries, paper clips, computer disks, candy bar wrappers. He failed to come up with the Edwards file. Discouraged, he moved to the center drawer. There, under a couple of legal pads and sheets of stationery, he found the money. "That's what set you off, isn't it?" Dr. Debbie interrupted. "Seeing all that cash just sitting there for the taking." Andy sighed and shook his head. Debbie simply didn't understand. The money really had nothing to do with it. He had been visited by something that defied description. He had been seduced, possessed, and ultimately betrayed at his moment of greatest weakness. Whatever that thing was, it was long gone now, and he had been left alone to be locked up here. "We'll stop here for the day," Debbie said. "I think we've made some progress, don't you?" "I simply want to understand you, Andy. I want to help." Andy shrugged. What did it matter? Debbie was an idiot.
Oh, damn, B.
You got called out, son. Dude. The men came in and released him from his chair bonds, and Andy let them dress him in the straitjacket before they led him down the soft green hallway to his cell. The next session with Dr. Debbie began the following morning at 9 o'clock. Andy was brought from his padded cell to the green room, where the doctor waited, pad in hand. He looked even more like a chicken today, with his wisp of hair fanning out behind his skull and his eyes darting here and there. No, not like a chicken, like some other kind of animal. The two orderlies sat him down and began the tedious process of worming him out of the straitjacket and into the chair's bonds. Andy often wondered why they didn't just leave him in the jacket, After all, he wasn't about to go leaping at the doctor and tearing at him with his teeth. Debbie might have been an idiot, but he wasn't particularly offensive. And ever since the man in black had left him alone, Andy had felt himself again. Perhaps they wanted to afford him the remains of his dignity. But bonds, after all, were bonds. Did it really matter if they came in little leather straps instead of a straitjacket? "Where did we leave things yesterday?" Debbie asked. He looked at his notepad. "Ah, yes. You found the money. What happened then?" "I went to look for the files somewhere else." "You didn't take the money at that point?" He shook his head. What could it have done for him? He lived a simple life. "You knew the money was there if you needed it. Do you think that knowing you had a means of escape somehow facilitated the act?" Andy stared at Debbie. He couldn't believe the depth of the man's ignorance. The money had nothing to do with what happened at the club. Nothing at all. That was self-defense. He attacked me. I didn't plan it. "I see. And the others?" Andy didn't say anything. How could he possibly say what he believed to be true? That he had been terrorized by a demon? That he had become a kind of plaything in a much larger game? Debbie leaned back and crossed his legs, as if flaunting his own freedom to move as he wished. I was wrong, Andy thought. He was starting to find Debbie offensive, after all. "Tell me what happened next, Andy." Continue the story. He worked through the next day as usual, and the next. The Edwards file remained missing, and Mr. Welk went on without it, albeit in a foul mood. As the days passed, Andy began to dread going home to his empty apartment. His thoughts and feelings were becoming disjointed, erratic. Ever since Annie left, he had been wading through a hip-deep stretch of dark water, and lately he had felt it rising. Soon, he feared, it would be over his head and he would drown in loneliness. Annie used to tell him he was selling himself short. "When are you going to wake up? You just have to find the guts. People take what they want in this world, and if you let them, they'll take it from you." She finally left him after 2 decent years for a man with more guts. When he'd found her note, it drove the air out of him like a fist to the stomach. I know, sad.
She's like, "I don't love you no more."
Over the next several nights, Andy saw the man in black every time he closed his eyes. Tuesday morning, he sat bolt upright in bed. Something had been chasing him down pitch-black corridors. Andy had run blindly through the darkness, hands in front of his face, through corridors that were without end. He ran through the center of the earth and back again, sure that the man in black was at his heels. The corridors bounced sound in such a way that it was impossible to tell which way to turn. Finally, he saw the light ahead and pressed forward, his throat locked in a silent scream. And when he had reached the light, he turned to face the creature chasing him, and found nothing but emptiness. After the horrible dream, he took a sick day to go to the zoo, hoping to calm his nerves. That was where he saw the man in black had followed him out of his dream world. The zoo was a favorite place of Annie's. She had loved to watch the lions pacing their cages, the monkeys swinging and chattering, the big birds preening in all their glorious colors. "Animals are so refreshing," she said once. "They don't care what other animals think of them. They just go about their business." Andy began to understand what she meant, as he watched the monkeys in their cages. They fought and chased each other with a seemingly endless supply of energy. They exposed themselves, defecated, made love without restraint. They were not held back by any moral code. If one monkey was larger than the others, he simply took what he wanted. That was the nature of things, as Annie had often told him. Eat or be eaten. His skin began to crawl. He turned away from the cage and froze. The man in black was standing in his shadow. "Have you learned anything yet, Andrew?" he asked. "Or do we need to watch a while longer?" Andy turned and ran, and the man in black's laughter followed him all the way through the park to the gates. After that, Andy began to see the man in black everywhere. Through the windows of shops, in the rush hour crowds on the street, at the bus stop. He seemed aware of Andy's every move and positioned himself for the moment of greatest surprise. appearing in mirrors or as shadows glimpsed out of the corner of the eye. Andy wandered through the city streets without direction, the words of the man in black following him everywhere. "Have you learned anything yet, Andrew? Or do we need to watch a little while longer?" Finally, a nervous wreck, he ended up at the office after the sun went down. The empty spaces were like tombs. He walked past the conference room behind a wall of glass, and Mrs. Underwood's office with its strange African sculptures like offerings for the dead. He entered Mr. Welk's office, then crossed the floor quickly and rummaged through the center drawer. His trembling fingers found the envelope, and he fumbled to open it, almost dropping the money onto the floor. He counted it out. $1,600 in cash. It was a small fortune to him, over 2 weeks' pay. Then he imagined them catching him in the act, Mrs. Underwood calling the police from the front desk. Mr. Welk, a look of disappointment darkening his chubby face as he stood in the doorway shaking his head. Andy could almost see him there now, watching. The images were so strong, he could see where they might lead, and was helpless to shut it all out. Mr. Welk's body sprawled across the desk, his fat belly slit open. Mrs. Underwood with purple handprints around her neck. Stuff's about to get a little real.
I know, I think he's tripping, son.
Andy shuddered. The emotion that had carried him thus far died in his breast. He replaced the envelope, slid the drawer shut, and left the office. On the way out, he almost ran headfirst into the janitor. The man shied away like he was being threatened. "Mr. Lomos!" Andy kept his hands shoved deep into his pockets, and told himself to be calm. He had not done anything. He was not a thief. He caught a sudden brutal image of the man like a snapshot, laying across his cart, bloody, staring, his eyelids cut out.
Ugh.
The man in black stood beside the corpse, his eyes red-rimmed with hellfire. Andy clenched his teeth and did not scream. "I'm sorry if I startled you," he said. "Didn't know anyone was here. Be out of your way in a minute. Take your time. I was just leaving." The janitor gave him one more look and pushed his cart, full of spray cleaner and rags, out ahead of him. Andy left the office and began to wander again, and the man in black followed him. There was something more insistent in the man's gaze now, an eagerness that had not been evident before. He became bolder, showing himself in every angle, every crevice and alleyway. There seemed to be a pattern to his movements, as if he were directing their path to an awaited end. Eventually, he sought refuge inside a club on 7th Avenue. Lights flashed above him. Bodies writhed together on the dance floor. He ordered a beer, drank it down, and ordered another, and yet another. Feeling the heavy beat of music deep in his chest, soon he was turning and moving with the crowd. It had been a long time since he had felt this way among a group, his own insecurities and self-consciousness dissolving in a bubbling stew of colored lights, naked flesh, and sweat. Each one of the dancers around him had their own smell, he noticed. A pretty young girl, her sweat clean and light, and a man with a heavy belly who smelled like sour milk.
Ew.
What did he smell like to them? Yeah, that's nasty. Andy wondered, did he have a recognizable odor? And if so, was it pleasant or offensive? That was something he wished he had asked Annie. At the thought of her, the room darkened and the colors bled out of the lights until they flashed in shades of gray. The faces that surrounded him were pale, fleshy lumps. They leered at him as the light played games with their features, elongating noses and deepening the pouches under their eyes.
Eek.
Andy danced and drank with the wolves, and a while later he noticed the man in black standing in the shadows across the room, watching him. The man in black's eyes glowed blood red among the grays.
Yikes.
He did not know when the girl started dancing next to him. It seemed as if she had just appeared there all at once. She wore a blue halter top that showed the upper halves of her breasts and cut away to reveal her belly below. He fixed his gaze on her like a man drowning in the ocean, and she stared back, unashamed, her body moving with the music as if of its own accord. Andy clung to her like an island in a storm. They danced together until, suddenly, without warning, one of the wolves poked bony fingers into his chest. "You think you're hot shit?" the wolf said, his hairy face slick with sweat. His tongue lolled from one corner of his grinning mouth. "That's my girl. I think you and me, we go for it right now."
Jesus Christ.
Shit going down.
I know, you need to calm your fucking shit, son.
The girl frowned and held Andy's arm. "Leave him alone, Brian."
That is exactly how she would sound.
Yeah. "Leave him alone, Brian." "What? You gonna get with this guy now?" the wolf said. "He's a sorry piece of shit." "Stop it, Brian. Just stop."
Stop it.
Stop. Andy could feel her hot flesh against his arm. Annie had liked to do that when they were in public, holding his arm as they walked, touching his knee under the table at restaurants. The wolf grabbed for her, and the girl shrank back. The lights and the beer and the smell of flesh overwhelmed him. The dancers spun on all sides, leering at him. He caught a glimpse of the man in black again. He was standing closer now, just over the wolf's left shoulder. As Andy watched, the man in black raised a finger to his throat and slashed. "Why don't you leave her alone?" Andy said. The wolf grabbed him by the shirt. "Not here," Andy managed to whisper. And then they were shoving people aside in their rush for the door. He felt consumed by an urgent need for conflict of any kind. His very muscles ached. The wolf dragged him into a darkened space between two buildings. "I told you to stay away from my girl, man," the wolf said. "Now you're going to learn to listen when I talk to you." It was dark, and a red neon sign advertising some beer lit up the wolf's face, just slightly, causing it to pulse and move with the light like a wound. But that was not what had caught his attention. Over the wolf's shoulder stood the man in black again. He was grinning. The wolf swung first at him. He moved to one side as the wolf's claws glanced off his skull, and then he swung his right fist upward from his hip with all of his strength. He heard the hiss of breath as he connected, and then Andy slipped and fell, hitting the slimy brick wall of the alley hard with his shoulder. The wolf lay on his side, wheezing painfully and holding his stomach. Andy struggled to his feet as the dampness of the alley floor soaked through the knees of his pants. His head was spinning. He felt the music beating through the wall next to him. He smelled the mold in the dark corners and the rot of the old buildings. This was what it was like to lose control, like an animal. The feeling was glorious. He caught movement below him and looked down as the wolf lunged upward from a crouch. Silver flashed in the wolf's claws before he felt a biting pain near his elbow. He managed to push the wolf away from him, feeling the wetness he knew was his blood trickling down his forearm into his palm. Enraged, he struck the wolf in the back of the neck, sending the creature into the wall with such a force that pieces of the crumbling brick fell to the pavement.
Damn, son.
He heard the blade click against the brick and then the ground. Both of them scrambled for the knife. Andy got to it first. An animal growl rose, unbidden, to his throat. He gripped the knife and thrust it blindly upward, feeling it jerk and slide in deep. The knife leapt in his hand like a fish at the end of a line. He let go, and the wolf fell. Sudden silence met his ears. Andy climbed to his feet. The handle of the blade stood up from the wolf's left side, a quivering silver and red-stained flag. Andy raised his wet and bloody hands toward the light. He felt a great pressure on his legs, as if he were sinking into the pavement. He saw that the creature lying at his feet was only a man. Horrified, he backed away until he felt something hard and rough against his shoulders. And there he crouched. "Andrew," he cringed. The man in black stood over him in the shifting light. He started to shriek, "Go away!" but was drowned out by the creature's voice, which echoed through his head. "The world does not care whether you live or die. It has always been that way, and those who have the will to survive continue to flourish, while all others are eaten. You are no different from them. You have the devil inside of you, as everyone does. There is nothing noble about having your face pressed into the dirt. Learn to fight and conquer. Take what you deserve. Andy felt a change in himself, a clarity of thought, of purpose, that he had never felt before. A stranger lived beneath this familiar skin all these years. He had been comforted, knowing that the dark corners of his mind were known to him, and that the worst was not so bad. But now there were new corners and new nightmares. Andy left the alley with the man's blood on his hands and jacket. He did not know where he was going, only that he needed to be moving. As he passed the large store window, he caught his reflection in the glass and stopped short. A hairy, snarling face with heavy brows and glowing eyes stared back at him. And you truly believed at that point that you had become this beast? Devi sat poised over his notepad, as if he were studying something. But Andy could see the look on his face, a look of disbelief. The look a sane man reserves for the insane or for the weak. For wasn't that what insanity was in the eyes of others? A weakness? Yes, Andy said. But I don't any more, of course. I must say, this is extremely interesting, Debbie said, lifting his wire-rimmed spectacles from his nose and examining their curved lenses. He lifted the sleeve of his shirt to polish them, and then settled them back on his nose again. Although you became quite disjointed in telling the story, jumping around from place to place, and time to time, I had some trouble following you. That's the way I remember it, Andy said. I can't tell it any other way. Yes. Well, I'd like you to relax. Just take a deep breath. Debbie waved his hand. That's better. So, you went back to the office the next day? No. Andy was puzzled. I went home and went to bed. Devi knew perfectly well what he had done. The police had roused him from a sound sleep at his apartment that morning, when they had made the arrest. Ah, Debbie set the pad down at the desk. Tell me about the money, Andy. When did you actually take it? I didn't take the money, I told you. But we found it in your possession. The police did. Surely you remember. Did the lawyers surprise you at the office earlier that day? Did they walk in on you at an awkward moment? Perfectly understandable. You had no choice. I sympathize. Devi's falsely soothing voice enraged him. He still can't grasp it, Andy thought. No one can. If he hadn't killed the man at the club, the man would have killed him. Self-defense. He had committed no other crime. He was not responsible for anything other than ignorance. He had been pushed to the brink of madness by one of the creatures that haunted those shadowed places between this world and the next. Mm-hmm. His only mistake had been in listening to its ravings, but he had been in a vulnerable state. With Annie gone, surely the doctors understood that much. But no. Devi was once again missing the point. There were more important things to consider here. What does the money or the rest of it matter? Andy whispered. He was real. You're talking about this man in black? Of course. Debbie reached down and opened a drawer of his desk. Andy saw with some surprise that the man's hands were shaking. He could show emotion, after all. I wasn't going to do this, Debbie said. I was afraid it would overwhelm you, but I don't see that I have any choice. He pulled out an envelope and spilled its contents on the desktop. A series of photographs in vivid color. It gets a little graphic here, forewarning.
Okay, I'm ready.
Mr. Welk sprawled across his desk, his throat cut in a wide red yawn, his entrails hanging down like monstrous purple worms. Mrs. Underwood, in her sterile cold office, her neck twisted, her tongue visible between puffy lips. Devi held up another photo. The janitor in his dirty yellow jumpsuit, now spattered with blood, thrown across his cleaning cart, fixing the camera with a wide-eyed stare. The janitor's eyelids had been cut out.
Ew! Did he kill them all?
Hmm?
Oh my god, what the fuck?
Do you see these? Debbie said. You did this. Andy. You. No ghost, no spirit, nobody else. They were helpless, innocent people. You murdered them in cold blood. I don't believe you, Andy whispered. His mouth was a dusty bowl. His temples throbbed. Had Debbie's ears grown more pointed? Was that a shadow of hair along his jawline? The police found the Edwards file at your apartment, along with the money. Do you understand? You took it. No, the man in black. This is how they found you that morning, Andy, Debbie said. He held up the last picture. Here is the man in black. Andy could not speak. His heart was racing, and his throat closed as he stared at the last image captured on film. A picture of himself in police handcuffs, standing against the wall of his apartment. He wore a black tuxedo suit with a black bow tie and a black shirt underneath. A black flower decorated the lapel.
He's a man in black. Oh my god.
Dun, dun, dun. The camera had turned one final ironic trick. In the light of flash, his eyes glowed red. There was one more body, Andy, Debbie said. It had been there, under the floorboards, for some time. A female. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No way.
The green-colored room spun across his sight. It couldn't be Annie. No, Annie had left him alone with the demon, and his flesh had been weak, but he was not a cold-blooded murderer. He had not done this. When he looked up again, Debbie was grinning at him. His nose had stretched itself into a snout, his ears grown long and pointed with tufts of hair, his teeth sharp and yellow. One of the others. Why hadn't he seen it before? Dr. Debbie wasn't a chicken at all. Dr. Debbie was a wolf. As he realized this, the room seemed to darken, and out of the darkness stepped the man in black. He stood directly behind the door, and as Andy watched, his mouth opened wide. Inside, it was deep and very red. Am I wasting my time here? Will you let them take you under, like so many sheep, or will you act? Andy? Debbie still held the last photo in one hairy paw. Now, it showed nothing more than an empty bedroom, which, of course, was what it had shown all along. Are you all right? Andy made a fist. One of the straps was loose. The letter opener on Debbie's desk was within reach. I'm feeling much better now, Doctor, he said. Thank you.
What? He's like, no, I'm fine. It's cool. I'm good.
I'm just gonna fucking murder your ass. No worries.
Like, I'm fine. It's cool. What? You thought I was some? Nah, I'm good. How about you take these restraints off me, and then we have, like, a civil conversation?
With the man in black. You know, just manipulating my psyche here.
Yeah, I'm fine. It's cool. Fight Club. We don't discuss or talk about what happens in Fight Club.
That's pretty intense.
Dang. You know
I like that story.
I really like how they incorporated, like, wolves. I love wolves and just, like, the whole, like, the raw, like, rah, 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 rah.
It's interesting is that's how his mind or whatever portrayed, like, the bad people.
Yeah.
Or just people in general.
Yeah. But it's like, no, you're the wolf. You're the crazy pants.
Yeah.
Dang. Oh, that's terrifying to be like, no, like, I'm fine, but he thought he was just, like, protecting himself, at least in the alley.
Yeah.
But,
and then doesn't remember, like, killing the people in the office or his girlfriend.
Anything else.
Ugh.
Dang, son, that's intense. That was a good story. I'm glad you found that one, though. Like, I didn't really want to, like, interrupt too much because I was, like, listening to it so much. But I think...
Yeah, that wasn't one that was, like, like a factual kind of story. That was like a legitimate like story. You have to picture it in your head type deal.
Yeah, definitely. It was a really good one. So how did you come across that story?
It's from a book. Let me see if I can find the book.
But, like, how'd you find the book?
I was just looking at my local library. I have a library card, and then they have this website where I can go and look for ebooks and audiobooks. Mm-hmm. It's actually really nice. So I just put in my library card, and I can loan out books. I typed in, like, horror. It's called American Horror, and it's by Scott Nicholson. Well, it's edited by Scott Nicholson, so it's just like a collection of horror stories.
Ooh.
I've read a few of them. It's a pretty good read. I don't know if there's any, like, real mental disorder that could be, like, linked to what he experienced. It was very, like, fictional based, but I don't know. Maybe, I was thinking kind of like schizophrenia, potentially, but... Or maybe it was just, like, a demon from the other side.
Ooh, and he's just possessed, and he's like, I'm gonna kill you. I know. I don't know. I feel like there's, like, so much of a spectrum that we don't even know.
Maybe, like, multiple personality disorder, because he didn't remember.
Yeah.
The Man in Black was his other personality, and it would come in, like, telling him to do stuff.
Yeah, that's true. And it's just, like, they never existed. Like, Fight Club. And that wraps up this Spooky Scary Show. If you wish to stay up to date with us, be sure to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. We are super excited to announce that we are now on Podbean at Spooky Scary Show. We have a lot in store for our listeners and appreciate you for picking us to listen to. So we will scare you later.
Bye.
Spooky.